Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola and I am thrilled to be guest designing for the Greeting Farm. Today we're going to be working with a couple of stamp sets. This is the Mega Mini Go Time and Main Street. So basically I didn't have a choice because as soon as I saw the Main Street and all the little buildings and houses, I knew I was going to make a scene. I just knew I was. So you'll have to forgive me for the lighting. Typically I don't film in the morning because the sun shines directly into my window, but due to work and time constraints I really didn't have a choice. So it's pretty yellow, but it'll get better as we go, I promise. I used a T-square ruler to just give myself two little guidelines. The idea, as you saw with the one I kind of pre-stamped out, which I do with most of my scenes, just so I kind of know where everything's going to go. I wanted there to be this row of houses, a street that my little car would be parked in, and then just kind of like a grassy park area that she would be standing on. So I stamped my little girl and then I masked her. I'm using two different kinds of masking. One is 3M Post-it note tape, and then the other one is Eclipse masking paper. They both work really well. That's what I had like leftovers on my desk. So I masked the ground for the grass and then stamped my car. This is to ensure that the wheels are going to be parked behind my grassy area in the street and not just, like she pulled up on somebody's lawn. And then I'm going to start stamping the houses. So I could have done it all in my Misty, but the reason that I didn't is because it was easier for me to stamp them one at a time so I could get the placement right for the trees that I wanted to add, and then also the perspective. So some of them are stamped right up on top of the line, this front tree and then this building both are, but then I'm going to start to stamp some things in the background, and this is just going to help give us some dimension so that it doesn't look just like this one layer card that doesn't look like a real scene. I wanted it to have some depth. If you've never watched my videos before, if you're watching on the Greeting Farm channel and you've never watched my videos before, scene cards is something that I love to do. They just make me happy. Especially when they're like stamps as cute as this. Like as soon as I saw them, I was like, pair those together, you got an adorable little scene. So I'm stamping this other building here and I'm masking everything. When you are building a one layer card, you want to stamp what they call front to back, which means anything you want in the front, you stamp first and then mask it and then stamp your background. So here, this house is set maybe, I don't know, a quarter of an inch back, just so it will be behind. The only other thing with the masking I wanted to show you is I wanted to increase the height of this building so that I had a good composition. So what I did was I wiped off the bottom portion of my stamp. So I inked it up and then I wiped it off with a baby wipe. So I just stamped the windows to the roof. Now when I go back in, I'm going to wipe off the roof. I'm going to match up the first window with the second one I stamped and then stamp it down again. So because they are drawn identical, I can do that and just create that length for the building. If they weren't identical, I could have just drawn the lines to give it some depth or give it some length since it's behind everything anyway. So now you'll see I'm putting down a bunch of masking. The reason that I am is because I'm very stingy with my Copic ink. Especially with the hold that's been on Copic markers, it's kind of difficult sometimes to get them. So a lot of times I will save myself the ink and just mask everything. I've already cut them anyway. I'm making a one layer card. So I will mask everything and then put down my color with Distress ink. In this case, I'm using Distress Oxides, just because they kind of blend a little bit smoother. So I did the blue, which is a salty ocean. And then here I'm just trimming off the wheels so that I will get a nice straight line for that grassy, I don't want to call it the grassy knoll, because that makes everybody think of Kennedy, which is not happy. And this card is happy. The grassy park. So I just went ahead and masked that down and then put some Twisted Citron on the bottom. I'm not trying to get really any depth or shading with this. I'm just trying to get a base layer down. So while I was doing this, you'll see I'm gonna, do the whole reveal, and it's gonna be awesome because one layer cards, this is the best part of one layer cards, is removing all your masking and seeing what you have left. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove all of that. And then at some point or another, and I don't know at what point it happened, I got green on my sky. And that Twisted Citron is a very bright color, so I'm going to try to fix that. I should have probably put my masking back in place, PPS. But, you know, I went rogue and decided that I could, in fact, avoid those buildings. And so I would just take the color all the way up to the top. It didn't cover it, guys. And again, if you've never seen my videos, I don't start over. At this juncture, I am so invested in this card. I've done all of the stamping, all of the coloring with the distress inks. I'm not starting over. So we're just going to fix it. We're just going to fix it. I tried, because they're distress oxides, they do react with water. I am not working on watercolor paper, so I used minimal water. I tried just kind of creating some cloud shapes. That wasn't working for me. So here's how I'm going to fix it. I'm going to go in with a very stiff bristled brush. And this is white acrylic paint. And I'm going to water down the first layer. I don't want a ton of water. You'll see I'm kind of blotting it off on my block there. This is going to create some more translucent clouds. So I'm just kind of stippling it on. That's all I'm doing. I'm just dot, dot, dot. I will warn you though, we're using paper masks. And so you have to be careful, because you can get some bleeding into your buildings underneath your masks, which I did, but I'm not concerned. I'll fix it later. The second part of this, the part I'm doing now, is completely solid paint, so white acrylic. So it's going to be very matte, and it's going to do a lot to cover it. So I was happy with the way that the background was now, and I let everything completely dry. I also kind of smushed it in a book so that everything would be flat for coloring. Now, straight into the coloring. And this is long. I mean, I hope you have a beverage, a snack, you know, you're in your jams, you're chilling out, because this is a long video. It just is. I could have probably split it up into two, but I guess I didn't want you to have to like bounce back and forth. Everybody's here to learn different things. If this is not, you know, if you don't need to learn the masking, great, then skip to the coloring. If you're comfortable with the coloring, or maybe, you know how to color a little girl, but you want to know how to color a street, bounce around. You're not going to hurt my feelings. The reason that, you know, we do these videos is to teach people. So here I colored in the whole thing with a C1 just to get some moisture on the paper. And then I'm going to start building up my scene. So that little light area that you see in between is my curb. And I need that to be separate. So there's a sidewalk, a curb, then the street. Then we're just going to start adding in these layers. So I colored in the whole thing with the C3 minus the curb. And now I'm adding some depth on this with some C5. So basically the sidewalk area is going to be, there's going to be a little bit of shading on the lip. And then once you get into the street, because that's going to be lower than the curb, that's definitely going to be darker. So I'm drawing myself a guideline, and then I'm just coloring right over those little yellow lines. I'm not concerned about them at this juncture. They will still show up. That particular yellow is a very bright color. There would also be some darker shading here up against the grassy portion, because again, the street is going to be lower than the grass. So switching now to the C7, which I thought was going to be my darkest color. Turns out not true. So adding in that darker shading. I'm not going to add any of this to the sidewalk. I'm only going to add it to the street. And then I'm really going to flick the color down from just the top portion and fill in kind of those little areas in between the car and my little girl. I decided as I was doing this, now you'll see I'm going to blend it out with the C5 and then top everything off with the C3. When I was looking at it, it just felt too light. It didn't feel like a street, like blacktop, like a road. It just didn't. So, again, we just adjust. Like, card making is all about adaptability. So if it doesn't seem like it's happening for you the first way that you tried it, then just try something else. It's just a card. You're not married to it. So now I'm looking at it. I don't like how light that street is. So now I'm going to bring in a C9. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to put the C9 exactly where I put the C7. And you'll see how much it just looks so much better having that dark contrast there, and it just looks so much more like a street. So again, filling in those little areas, I'm really only adding a line of it next to the grassy area because there wouldn't be necessarily a ton of darkness there. It would be much darker coming from the other side because you can see more of that portion of the street. So blending out the C7, now my lightest color is going to be the C5, and I really liked this whole thing much better. However, I've covered up those yellow lines, like just completely covered them up. It's totally okay. We're going to fix it. I darkened up the curb a little bit just so it would make a little bit more sense with the C3, and then I thought it should be maybe just a little bit darker. So I went in with the C5 and made the sidewalk portion the lightest, the curb slightly darker, and then the road. I'm going to go back in with that Y08 and re-put in my yellow lines. They're difficult to see, but Copics are transparent. So if you go over a lighter color with a darker color with a lighter color, it will lift it. So I just went over those yellow lines with my C1, and it was able to kind of pull that yellow up out of that gray. So now that the street's done and my background is complete, now I'm going to start working on the rest of the character. So this little girl, she's totally adorable, and there's two little girls and a little boy in this, and I really struggled with whether or not I wanted to do the little girls or the little boy, but the flowers is what sold me. I mean, really, I love all things flowers. So here I'm doing her shading. I typically color my cards as if the light source was in the top right hand corner, and that is also how I'm coloring her. There'd be shading on the left hand side because the sun would be away from that, but there would also be shading on the right because her hair is falling over her face. You might think that this color combination is a little bit strange, and while everything else is so stark white, it will look a little dark, but as we continue to add more colors, it will appear more light. So here my E00 was kind of running out of ink. I had to go back, re-ink it, and then come back and do it again. You don't ever want to use your markers dry. If you don't have enough pigment in them, you're going to end up scrubbing them and you'll ruin your nibs. And plus, you're not going to get great coverage anyway with a dry marker. So now that that's all blended out, I decided that I was going to make her a little brunette. I thought that that would be a good neutral color. There's going to be lots going on here. You can see we already have lots going on here. For hair, what I typically do is I use the tip of the marker and very light-handed flicking motions. Because my light source is in the top right-hand corner, the top right-hand portion of her hair is going to be where my highlight falls. So I'm going to add those little flicks of color coming from her center, well, it's not really a center part, but from her part, and then also from where her pigtails are gathered, that would be darker. When you gather anything, it's going to be darker. And then I just added a little bit of shading from the ends of her pigtails coming up. So here you can see the left-hand side of her hair is appearing to be much darker, and it should because the light source is on the right-hand side. You certainly don't have to color with a light source. That is not something that you ever have to do. Your image will still be beautiful. That's just something that is a carryover from my high school art class. So once I have everything out to the darkest color, I'm going to go from the darkest color back into the lightest. I color everything twice. This is just how I feel I get the best blend. If you can do it in just one go, that's fantastic. If you need to do it in 3, that's also fine. There is no right or wrong way to do this. It's your card. You have to be happy with it at the end of the day. I will caution you against over blending though, especially with hair or anything where you're doing the flicking motions. A lot of times when I was coloring, when I first started, I owned my Copics for years before I ever even really used them because I never got a result that I liked. And part of that reason is because I was being far too much of a control, well, there's no nice way to say it. I was being a total control freak. I wanted it to be blended, but I wanted to have dimension, and so I was over blending my colors. I was just going over them and going over them and going over them. Don't do that. don't do it. You're not going to be happy with the way that it looks. You're not going to have that dimension that you're looking for. So just do the light flicking motions. There's going to be some natural highlights in there and call it a day. Because my light source is in the top right hand corner when I'm coloring her dress, that left hand side is going to be darker. Right now it kind of looks like something out of the 70s, but bear with me, we're going to add more shading to the right hand side as we go. I just always leave myself a very generous highlight because I am very heavy handed with my dark colors. While I have this blue out, I'm going to go through the sky and just hit any areas where my masking wasn't perfect. At this juncture, you may notice that her flowers are pink. Her flowers are pink. I love hot pink. I wanted to color them pink, but it didn't match the rest of the card. So ignore that. Just ignore it because we're going to fix it later. Here, in order to give myself some texture for the grass, I'm using the same kind of flicking motions that I used for her hair, very light hand, and I'm just adding little grasses. So I'm putting the marker down and flicking up. That's all I'm doing. It looks like I'm going super fast because, in fact, I am going super fast. This is not a very difficult technique, and this is a great way to practice your flicking for other images. So draw some grasses. I'm going to do the same thing with all the colors that I showed you. I will keep the darker ones concentrated more toward the back, and the front ones more toward the front. I just didn't want to bore you to tears, and this video is long. It's so long. I'm going to use the same greens to give myself some grass across the street because without that grass, they look kind of just like they're sitting on an edge of a cliff hanging over the precipice of the sky, which is not what we want. So I added a little bit of shading with a darker green, and now I'm going to pull out a very dull green. So YG93, it is a yellow green. It is a lot more what we call desaturated than the yellow greens I typically use, which means there's just more gray in it. It's just a little duller, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's going to change the way these trees look so everything doesn't look like the same color without having to pull out 16 more colors that I am going to have laying all over my desk that are completely unnecessary. So when I'm adding the shading, I'm adding the shading to the trees if they're behind something, and then I'm just kind of adding little dots or squiggles, and I mean that, people. It's dots or squiggles. I mean, there's nothing fantastic about the detail that I'm adding to that tree. I just need there to be some color variation. That's it. That's what it comes down to. And then I'm going to blend that back out with my YG03 and then go over it one more time with that YG93 to push it back, push it into the background. Anything that is that desaturated is going to fall into the background. Here I'm using the same colors. The only color I'm missing is the YG93, and you can see the total difference between the two trees. And that was all I needed. That was all the difference that I needed, was that one marker over the top of it to just make it a little bit more gray. For those trees, I just added little streaks of color from the left and the right so that there would appear to be some depth. And then I went over it all with my lightest color. I also colored the, what are these, little tree boxes and my tree trunk in the back with the same browns I used for her hair. Moving on to this car, we're more than halfway through. If you're still hanging on, you're a rock star. I'm doing the tires, and for some reason, and it happens to everybody, happens to me even though I color this stuff all the time, I forgot where my shading needed to go. And so for this tire, it is a little bit darker on the left-hand side, and it should not be. There should be a highlight on the inside edge of the left-hand side. Does that make sense? So here's where I finally figure out, like, oh, I should have left that lighter. Ha, ha, ha. I'm going to fix it. It's going to be fine. Most things that most errors that you will make in a card are completely fixable. I'm using the same sea colors I used for the road. They aren't directly next to each other, so it doesn't matter that they're the same thing. They're not going to blend into each other. There's enough to break them up. And also, what other color am I going to color these tires? Is what it is. So I'm using, again, the same flicking motions. I'm trying to leave a highlight on that top right-hand portion of the wheel. For the hubcaps, I'm just going to color them in with a light gray. I didn't get great stamping with the stars. That was my own fault. I just didn't ink well enough. But again, totally fixable, or moving on with the rest of the coloring. I'm adding just very minimal shading to the door handle with the same gray colors, and using the C1 to kind of get myself a little bit of a highlight in the center. I mean, I went classic. I just did. I went with a red convertible. Highly likely that this young lady will probably get pulled over a lot. According to statistics, apparently if you drive a red car, you are much more likely to get pulled over. There's an interesting fun fact for you. But anyway, so as I'm doing this, I'm mapping out some highlight points. Cars are typically shiny. You don't usually find matte cars unless they're made out of primer. Those are matte. But typically, new shiny convertibles are shiny, and we want them to look shiny. So we're going to leave that white area highlight. And right now it looks a little funny, but stay with me, okay? So I'm going to add some shading above and below it. I'm not completely covering my lightest color. I'm getting pretty close to the edge of it, but I'm not completely coloring it. And then I'm going to color in the rest of the car with that R35. I'm going to start adding some shading with this R29. And again, I'm going above and below it. I'm not completely covering the R35 because we want there to be a smooth gradation. I'm also going to leave a little bit of an area here on the left-hand side that's kind of a continuation of that highlight as the 35. It wouldn't be as bright because the sun wouldn't be directly hitting it, but it would be a little bit lighter. For my darkest color, I'm going to shade the doors. I'm going to shade from the bottom up. Objects' bottoms are typically darker. I am going to add just a teeny tiny little bit of shading to the top, and then I'm going to add some slightly below the door just to give the door some shape so that it looks like it kind of rolls up as the door comes up from the bottom with that little bit of darker shading. Now, like I said, we're going darkest to, or lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. So now we're working back out to that lightest color. And once we get to this C35, we're going to start to bring in and make those white areas a little bit smaller. I told you in the beginning, I like to conserve a large area of highlight so I don't lose it. That's just me, and I fill them in when I go through on the second round. I'm going to fill in the highlight with the lightest color. You don't have to. If you want a really bright highlight, leave it white. That's totally cool. I'm adding just a little bit of shading to the windshields with a blue and then blending that out with a colorless blender. Here I mapped out all of the colors. I mean, it was so long. This video is still 30 minutes. I mean, it took me 2 hours to make this card. Now, some people are like, I don't want to spend 2 hours on a card. And that's totally cool. Don't. But I like building scenes, so I don't mind it. Here, like I said, I took my lightest color and I mapped out where I wanted all of my colors to go. And then I'm going to start the coloring. Everything that I'm doing, lighter on the right-hand side, darker on the left-hand side, except for the doors, because the doors are inset. The shadow would actually be on the right-hand side because you would have part of the building that was coming up and over it, blocking the light. For these little round awnings, I'm just kind of shading from the left and right-hand side. For the awning that's hanging over, I am adding just a little bit of shading to their centers from the top of it. It would be lighter toward the bottom. For the shutters, everything darker on the left. For the doors, everything darker on the right. I'm not going to show you every single thing. I'm just showing you this because I did all of the reds at one time. So I'm just showing you this one, and then if there's anything different that I colored, I will show you that. There is nothing that I dislike more than watching somebody's video and not being able to understand how they got from point A to point B. That's why my videos are longer. Like I said earlier, skip whatever you don't need to see. It's totally cool. Everybody's at different levels. Nobody's feelings are getting hurt here, folks. So here I'm just going over with my lightest color and blending that back out. And then you're going to see that there's some areas that we're going to color in. Here I decided to show you the house. There would be shading to the left and underneath of the windows. They're going to stick out. Those shutters are going to stick out. They're going to cast a shadow. Underneath the roof is going to be darker, and both of them, because in this particular house, there's 2 of them. So there would be shading under both of them. I'm not going to take the darkest color all the way to the right-hand side because there is some light there. So that light would make the right-hand side of the house lighter. But you can do whatever makes you happy. Again, light source, completely optional. This is just me showing you how I do it. Blending that back out with the lightest color for the house. And then I'm going to do this house in the background with the green. And please forgive me if you have a greenhouse with a brown roof and red shutters, but I think this is probably the ugliest house I have ever colored. I don't like red and green together. I just don't. It makes me think of Christmas, which I love. I love Christmas, but in any other scenario, I don't like them together. But this was just the way the cookie crumbled for me. Because of the way that I colored other things, I had to get that green in there somewhere, and this was it. So I'm just hoping that with everything else going on, it's not that noticeable, to be honest. So I needed some more neutrals. I had lots of the bright colors in there, but I needed more neutrals. I already colored her hair and the tree trunks brown. Brown is a great neutral. There's plenty of brown houses out there. So I just picked the same ones that I previously used and started adding some shading to the colors. Did you hear that? Some shading to the buildings. That's more accurate. Here I accidentally grabbed the darker brown. I didn't intend on making the house this dark, but it happens. For this building on the left-hand side, basically because I'm a psychopath, I decided I was going to make it a white building with all of this red detail. Note, if you're going to color something white and add red detail, do the white first. Save yourself. I mean, really, save yourself. Because the lighter colors can pick up that red and carry it. If you already have red down, you have to be extremely careful, which I was, and thankfully disaster was averted. But when you color something white, you want there to be white. You don't want to shade all of it. Leave white areas. And just add, you still want to add the contrast. I'm still adding some C5 here, even though it's a white building, but I'm adding very minimal. In between those little awnings, I only added a dot. I'm not making that up. I'm not over exaggerating. It was just a dot. So now everything's colored in the background. Here is where the pink just really stood out. It didn't make sense. So I'm going to go back in and make that red. I'm adding just a line of my darkest color from the center out into the rest of the petals. I'm going to go over that with an R29, and then we're going to go straight into the windows. So for windows, what I like to do is I add shading to the bottom left and a little bit to the top right, so that there is a highlight, a diagonal highlight in the center. Once I did all that with the B0, I went in very quickly with the B quadruple 0 and just lined those up. Here you'll see I'm working with what they call a embossing pen. It's a souffle pen. They go down and they dry completely opaque. That's how I'm going to get the grasses to stick up over the street and to stick up over the car so that they make sense, and I didn't have to do a ton of work. Switching over to the white gel pen, I'm going to add some details to her flowers. I'm also going to add some highlights to the car, just bulk up those highlights with the white. And I'm also going to add a diagonal line across my windows to really show off that highlight. I also added some detail onto her dress. I made her little dress polka dotted because I am helpless to not add detail. At this juncture, I've spent so much time. I want to be happy with the way that the card looks, and I want it to have enough detail. Do I know that, this is a 2-hour long card? Yeah, I do. I'm good with it. I outline all of my images. This is not necessary, but it will help your colors pop. It will also help set things apart from each other. So I'm using an EK Success writing pen. They are Copic safe. That's my preference for outlining. Again, totally optional. All of this is optional, people. I'm using clear Wink Estella just to add some shimmer, of course, to that beautiful convertible, all of my windows, and then my little girl's dress. I picked the see you soon sentiment because I'm actually going to see a girlfriend of mine soon, so I'm going to mail this to her. But I think it'd be great for like a sweet 16 birthday, especially with that little card, or a road trip. So I stamped that in black Simon Says Stamp ink, and then I'm just going to accent it with some black Nuvo drops. This is, I usually squeeze out a little bit on a scrap piece of paper before I start on my actual card just to make sure I don't have any air bubbles. And then I'm just going to let it pool, go straight down and straight up. That's the best way to get a round dot. And then that's it. That's the whole card. So if you made it this far, you're a rock star. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope that you learned a little something, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.